Hey, HannahMouse1 here. Welcome to part 3 of my Pumpkin Patch Panic tutorial series, where I'll show you how to make a Halloween themed game over the course of a week. Last time we added the pumpkins and today we'll be adding the enemies. Head over to the enemies sprite and drag in a when I receive play block, and to this attach a hide block. Now we want to create a new list, enemies, and this will keep track of all the enemies that are currently in play. Under the play script, delete all of enemies, then repeat 5 times, add none to enemies. Then add a forever loop, and within this loop add a wait block. Set this to be pick random 1 to 5 seconds. Add an if statement with the condition entities contains none. We then need to make 2 variables for this sprite only. The first should be called this type and the second this ID. Within the if statement, set this type to 1 for now and set this ID to item tag of none in enemies. Then create clone of myself. Then add in a when I start as a clone block, and to this attach a show block and a go to block. For Y, set it to 160, and for X, drag in a pick random operator. For this, we need it to be pick random minus 240 to 240. This will set the enemy's initial position to any random point along the top edge of the screen. Then add a forever loop. Within this loop, replace item this ID of enemies with floor of Y position. Up to 5 enemies will now spawn at any given time, but we need to give them some functionality. Let's start with the zombie enemy. This will just walk around the pumpkin patch and crush the pumpkins, and will run away if approached by the player. For this, we're going to need a lot of new variables, all for this sprite only. 6 to be exact. This state, this target X, this target Y, this X-vel, this Y-vel, and this magnitude. Before the forever loop, in the create clone of myself script, set target X to pick random minus 112 to 112, and set target Y to be pick random 97 to minus 30, which indicates a position within the pumpkin patch. Then add an if-else statement to the forever loop, before where the enemy's list is modified. The condition should be this state is equal to 0. And now quickly go back to the play script and set this state to 0 before the forever loop. But back to our if-else function. We're going to start by sorting the X and Y velocities of the enemy, which will act very similarly to how it worked in the player's code from episode 1. Set this X-vel to target X minus X position, and set Y-vel to target Y minus Y position. Then set this magnitude to the square root of this X-vel times this X-vel plus this Y-vel by this Y-vel. Then add an if statement with the condition not magnitude is equal to 0. Within the function, set this X-vel to this X-vel divided by this magnitude, and set this Y-vel to this Y-vel divided by this magnitude. After the if statement, change X by this X-vel and change Y by this Y-vel. The zombie will now go to its first position. Now let's get it to move onto a new position once it's there. Take an if-else function and drag this if statement and everything after it into the else portion. Set the condition to be if this magnitude is less than 2. And within the function, set target X to pick random minus 112 to 112 and target Y to pick random 97 to minus 30. Now let's make it so that the zombies crush the pumpkins underfoot. First, we'll need a new list, pumpkin X's. Go to the pumpkin sprite and in the script that creates the clones, delete all of pumpkin X's at the beginning and add 0 to pumpkin X's within the repeat 40 loop. Then find the point in the script where the pumpkin Y value is updated and also replace item this value plus 1 of pumpkin X's with this XPOS. Back in the enemies script, create a new block and call it pumpkin check. Make sure that run without screen refresh is selected and click OK. We'll also need a new variable called this pumpkin check. At the start of our new define block, set pumpkin check to 1. Then repeat length of pumpkins, and I'm going to copy these 3 blocks that set the X-vel, the Y-vel, and the magnitude and drag those into the loop. However, this time for the X-vel, we want it to be X position, item this pumpkin check of pumpkin X's, and likewise for Y, we want Y position, item this pumpkin check of pumpkin Y's. Then add in an if statement and drag an AND operator into the condition space. For the first condition, we want it to read if magnitude is less than 16, and for the second, if item pumpkin check of pumpkins is equal to 4. And in this case, we want to replace item pumpkin check of pumpkins with 0. After this if statement, change pumpkin check by 1. Go back to where we coded in the behavior for the zombies. After we change the X and Y positions, add in our pumpkin check block. The pumpkins will now be trampled when the zombies walk over them. Now we need the zombies to flee when approached by the player. After our pumpkin check block, drag in an if statement. We need the condition to be if distance to player is less than 32. Within the function, set state to 1. We then need to copy the code that sets the X-vel and Y-vel and the magnitude. This time with X-vel being set to X position minus player X and Y-vel set to Y position minus player Y. We also need to copy in this if statement that divides the X velocity and Y velocity by magnitude. And after the statement, because we want the zombies to flee with some urgency, let's set this X-vel to this X-vel times 4 and this Y-vel to this Y-vel times by 4. And in the empty else function, change X by this X-vel and change Y by this Y-vel. We then need an if statement and drag an OR operator into the the condition space. Then drag a greater than operator into each side, and an abs operator into the left hand side of each of these. For those of you who don't know, the abs or absolute value of a number is its size, regardless of whether or not it's positive or negative. So both 5 and -5 have the absolute value of 5. For the first of these conditions, we need the abs of x position is greater than 230, and for the second, we need abs of y position plus 32 is greater than 190. Then within the function, replace item this ID of enemies with none and delete this clone. Zombies will now run away from the player. Let's now integrate the enemies into the sprite layering script we set up last time. Go to the workspace for the stage where we created our sorting order script. We want to copy everything after and including the line set sort to 1, change this initial repeat length of pumpkins to be repeat length of enemies, and go through anywhere and everywhere it says join pumpkin sort and change it to be join enemy sort, and anywhere it says item sort of pumpkin wise, change it to be item sort of enemies. In this initial if statement, take the sorting order contains join enemy sort condition and drag it into the left hand side of an OR operator. The condition for the other side should be item sort of enemies is equal to none. We can then copy this condition and replace this same, now incorrect, condition in the final if statement. Now take this if else function with the condition length of sort check of sorting order is equal to 8 and drag it into the if portion of an if else function. Set the condition to be if item sort check of sorting order contains pumpkin. Copy this inner loop from the if function and drag it into the empty else function. Change it from letter 8 to 6 and change where it checks pumpkin wise to enemies. Connect all of this to our sorting order script. Now we need to set the enemy's layer. Go back to the enemy sprite and at the end of the forever loop, go to back layer, go forward item tag join enemy this ID of sorting order layers and go forward y position is less than player y. Zombies should now appear at the correct layer. So let's get them animated. Drag in a when I start as a clone block and attach a forever loop to this. In this, add an if else function with an and operator in the condition space. For the first condition, we need it to read if this type is equal to 1, and for the second we need a not operator with the condition costume name contains zombie. In the function, switch costume to zombie 1. We'll fill in the else portion later. Drag in another when I start as a clone and again add a forever loop. Within this loop, wait 0.2 seconds. After this, we need an if else function with the condition this type is equal to 1. In the if portion, we need another if else statement with the condition this state is equal to 0. Within the if of this, we need yet another if else function, this time with the condition costume name is equal to zombie 1. In the if portion, switch costume to zombie 2, else switch costume to zombie 1. Copy this innermost if else function and drag it into the inner empty else function. This time, we want it to check if costume name is equal to zombie 3, in which case we'll switch costume to zombie 4, else switch costume to zombie 3, and that's the zombies done. Let's make spiders next, as these will work very similar to zombies. They'll also walk around the pumpkin patch and now replace tiles with cobwebs. These will both stop pumpkins from growing and slow the player if they walk over them, and again the player can scare the spiders away by approaching them. Go to the place script that creates the enemy clones. Drag in a pick random block into where it sets this type and set it to be pick random 1 to 2. Because I want to be able to tell the enemies apart, let's get the costume sorted first. Find the when I start as a clone script that only has the one if else statement inside the loop and copy said if else statement. Drag it into the empty else function. This time we need to check if this type is equal to 2 and whether the costume name contains spider. Switch costume to spider 1. Now go to the other costume script. Copy the if else function with the condition this type is equal to 1 and drag it into the empty else function. We need to check whether this type is equal to 2 and then basically switch anywhere it says zombie to spider, both in conditions and set costume blocks. We now need to alter the spider mechanics. Go to the pumpkin check define block and move this if statement into the if portion of an if else statement. Set the condition to be if this type is equal to 1. Copy the inner if statement and drag it into the empty else function. This time we need to check if item pumpkin check of pumpkins is 0, and we also want to drag the entire condition into an AND function with the extra condition being pick random 1 to 50 is equal to 1, and within the function we want to change this to replace item pumpkin check of pumpkins with 5. The cobwebs will now drop, but we need the player to actually slow down when over them. Go back to the player sprite and find where we run the movement script. Move it into the if portion of an if else function with the condition item touching +1 of pumpkins is equal to 5. Copy the movement block into the else portion and change the velocity of the version in the if portion to be 0.5. Finally, find the if statement that causes the enemy to disappear if it goes out of bounds. Move it into the if portion of an if else statement with the condition this type is equal to 1. Copy said if statement and move the copy into the else portion and change the value 32 to 16 and the value 190 to 170. These values have to be different as the spider sprite is shorter than the zombie sprite. That was an easy one. Let's add in something a bit different. Ghosts. These will chase the player for a few seconds before shooting off the screen. If the player gets too close, they'll be petrified and unable to move for a hot second. First, go to the enemy's script, and in the script where we contain the clones, change this pick random to be pick random 1, 2, 3. Go to the shorter when I start as a clone costume script and drag in an if function into the empty else space. Copy the condition from one of the if else functions and use it as the condition for our new function. Change it to be whether checking this type is equal to 3 and whether costume name contains ghost. And within the function, switch costume to ghost 1. Then go to the other when I start as a clone costume script. Drag an if else statement into the empty else function with the costume name is equal to ghost 4. In this case, switch costume to ghost 1, else next costume. So ghosts now spawn, but right now they're acting like spiders. Let's change that, shall we? Go to the script which controls the enemy behavior and move this if else statement with the condition this state is equal to 0 into the else portion of an if else function. Make sure these final 4 blocks are outside the function. Set the condition to be if this type is equal to 3. Add a new if else function into the empty if function with the condition this state is equal to 0. Copy in the 3 blocks that set this xvel, yvel, and magnitude. This time for xvel we need it to be player x minus x position, and for yvel we needed player y minus y position. We also need the if statement that divides the xvel and yvel by magnitude, and after this we want to set this xvel to this xvel times 2 and this yvel to this yvel times 2. For the else portion we can copy this if statement from the zombies that checks if they're out of bounds and drag that in. After the if else function, change x by this xvel and change y by this yvel. Then make a new variable for all sprites and call it petrified. Drag an if statement after the change y by block and add an and operator into the condition space. Set the first condition to be distance to player is less than 32 and the second to be petrified is equal to 0. Within the statement, set petrified to 25 and drag in an if statement. The condition of this should be this state is equal to 0. In this case, set this state to 1, set this xvel to this xvel times minus 2 and this yvel to this yvel times minus 2. This will cause the ghost to fly away after scaring the player. Although right now, scaring the player does zip, so we need to change that. Go to the player sprite and find this play script with the movement controls. At the start of this, set petrified to 0. Then take the if else function that controls the player's movement and drag it into the if portion of another if else function. Set the condition to be if petrified is equal to 0, and in the else portion of the function, change petrified by minus 1. We want to create a visual indicator for when the player is petrified, so go to the script that sets the costumes for the clones. Drag the if else statement into the if portion of an if else function with the condition if petrified is equal to 0. In the if portion, set brightness effect to 0, and in the else portion, set brightness to minus 35. This will make it so that the player is dulled out when petrified. To make things a bit more fair, let's make it so that the ghost stops chasing the player after a few seconds. Go back to the enemy sprite and add a new when I start as a clone sprite. Add an if function to this with the condition this type is equal to 3. Within this function, we want to wait 5 seconds and then add another if statement, this time with the condition this state is equal to 0. In the function, set state to 1, set this xvel to this xvel times 2 and this yvel to this yvel times 2. And now the ghost flies off screen after 5 seconds of chasing the player, and with that we're going to wrap things up for today. So thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you did, it lets me know there's something you want to see more of. Join the Discord, link down below, and I'll see you tomorrow with part 4, where we'll be sorting some of the more technical elements like a timer and the UI. Bye!